morning, everybody. Welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, Anne, and disembodied voices are currently offline. Well, no, John is here. He's disembodied hands. And I think Justin may be here later, but yes. Good morning. Guten Morgen. I have a stiff neck today, so I'm going to be doing a lot of this. You know that motion, right? With your stiff neck? Yeah. Yes, I'm here. Poof. Sorry. It was a bit of a slow-moving morning. But yeah. So how is everybody in the cold apocalypse doing? John said that in Fort Worth, Shadoweyes, the water treatment plant was shut down, and now they have to boil water to use it in Fort Worth. So apparently the Texans are moving into Mad Max territory pretty fast. I expect to be hearing about people mounting guns on their cars in no time. I'm not sure about other Reaperites. I only have contact with, I haven't texted Ed about how he's doing in the snowpocalypse. But Ed, I have faith that if anybody can cobble together a Mad Max mobile that'll work in frigid weather, it'll be Ed. So I think Ed's probably okay. Oh, just above the Madison-Milwaukee line, they're getting hammered. Yeah, my brother's in southeast Wisconsin, scrying eye. My brother, my niece, my nephew. He probably has already done it, Max Styles. Yes, indeedy. No, not normal. I'm sure the Mad Maxness of Texas has been rather over accentuated, exaggerated, as they say, as Mark Twain would say. Wow, at least you're getting a thaw. Well, if you're getting a thaw in Minnesota, maybe that'll be following everybody else. Maybe everybody else will be getting it. Milwaukee got 12 inch, yeah. My bro is, he's right near where we grew up, actually, down near, he's in Salem, which is near Bristol, which is pretty much 5 minutes from the border with Illinois. So halfway between Milwaukee and Wisconsin. So he's south Wisconsin. So I don't know. I know they got snow, but I don't know how much they got. But yeah, it's been pretty crazy, huh? Watching, like, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of happy I'm out here. Like, you feel guilty too. I was talking about this with the girl at the grocery store yesterday. She has family in cold states also. She's from Minnesota. And she's from, I'm like, my mom called me yesterday to, like, tell me about it. And I'm like, you don't want to know where I am, Ma. She was on the beach. So there's this, like, kind of this relief at being in somewhere with right now a normal climate, and also this guilty feeling. Okay. Yeah, so you're coming out of the deep freeze, so maybe the groundhog will relent, and because it's all because Groundhog Day. I actually do kind of hate to say it, because I was raised Catholic, and that means I have a heavy load of Catholic guilt, post-Catholic guilt in this case, muses. So I was raised guilty, and it's really hard to break that cycle. So I have this horrible guilty feeling for the fact that I spent thousands of dollars to move to California, and now I can enjoy the weather. Hey there, Balrog. Hey, it's been a long time since I've seen you in chat, Balrog John. Hello. Evening at France. Hey, Nene. It's good to see you. Sarasota got snow. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You had to put on a sweater today, Max Styles. So Max is just going to lord it over everybody, whereas I'm going to be like, I'm just going to be like, I wish for spring for everyone. This is the Anne, right? The Anne with the big heart saying, I wish for spring for all of you, including and especially my friends in Texas, without power, without water, without everything. Like, if I were in Texas, I think I would have just driven north, or driven lateral. I would have driven to the coast or somewhere warmer. You can't really go south from Texas without hitting the Mexico, but but you could go south-er, right? Or west-er and get to somewhere where stay in a hotel for a week. I would have been tempted. I'd be like, Ed, I'm taking a week off. I'm going to drive out to Southern California with the dogs, Springtime is sneeze time? Yeah. Somewhere with power, exactly, Shadow Raven. Like, I would at this point, after 3 days of this, I would have been just about done. I would have been ready to drive to some land, Arizona probably, actually, because my mom said it was like 70 there yesterday. I would have driven west to Arizona and just stayed in a hotel for a few days. COVID or no COVID, like, there is a limit. Like, having to boil water to use it is kind of, I think, my limit. I think it might be, like, no, so. Hey, Trouble. Oh, no, Trouble has to restart. Oh, that's a bad news. When we're talking about so much trouble and then Trouble says, I've got to restart, it's like, oh, no, the reset button's about to be hit. We're about to in for more trouble. All right, I love your name, Trouble. Obviously, I can make so many jokes with it. All right, so hey, look, we're doing a Catfolk. Shadoweyes, Catfolk Rogue by Julie Guthrie. 44118. Of course. More snows. Many snows, yes. No complaining about the weather in New York. I am moving my palette down. Let's see what we can work on today. We were working on our beautiful swords last time, and I'm very happy about how shiny they look. We got them kind of blocked in on the back, but that was partially because we didn't want blue sky on the back, so I think we're okay. Let me see. Let me look at her. We do need to work on the brown leather more, and the gold, and we could probably, and we need to do her eyes. Let's just give her eyeballs. Let's just do the eyeballs real quick. Where is my walnut? Actually. Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, we're gonna come if it goes on. So hopefully by then, they seem to be, I mean, other than that the winter weather has totally delayed vaccine shipments, they seem very confident that by late summer, a majority of people will have been able to get vaccinated. So if that moves on target, then I would see no reason why ReaperCon would not go. But it's up to Ed. Ultimately, it is always up to Ed. Ed, who is currently probably out on his tricked out Mad Max SUV. Hey, Bob and Julie. We were talking about the weather and how Fort Worth has descended into like Mad Max levels of apocalypse at this point, as far as I'm concerned. Actually, I should text Brian Pearsall, who also teaches at ReaperCon, those of you who know him, because he and his family are in Fort Worth. And they had new, like, they had, like, 1-year-old twin boys. So that's got to be fun when you've got no power or no water to have little kids. Brush, mixing brush. Need a blue. Need the blue. Where's my cyan blue? Usually it is hiding in the front. Yes, there it is. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, California has been screwed up. That's why now it looks like Blue Shield is having to step in to sort out California. Which I shouldn't be. This is the downside of living here. I think that everybody stays because of the weather. Like, I think that's the only thing. Sometimes. I mean, it's hugely expensive, and you've got really high state income tax, and you've got crazy politics on both sides of the fence. And then you, but you stay for the weather. But yeah, apparently California's kind of screwed up. Chains and crossbows on snowmobiles. Yeah, that sounds about Ed. Don't you think? Although I think he'd use his SUV because he'd be able to be in heated temperatures in the SUV, whereas if you're on snowmobiles or motorcycles, you're still cold. I think that being not cold would be the driving factor. Ha ha ha. See what I did there? I don't know, my brain is somewhere else this morning. But we are mixing up a pale blue. We're using cyan blue. It's 2-to-1 with white at this point. It's a pretty blue. It looks much lighter on the camera because of the... Let's see, can I get it to read correctly? Nope, it wants to look really light. It's actually quite a bit darker than that. I don't know what is up with my camera this morning, but it's like, let's read everything weird. Green users, apparently they have water in Fort Worth, but they're having to boil it because the water treatment plant shut down. It froze. That's what John told me about Justin this morning. And that means all my other Fort Worth friends are also having to do that. But yeah, Max Styles, I think. Dressed like the Humongous, yes. Ed will be... Oh, horizontal rain. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Isn't that normal for Scotland in like early spring, late winter? It was certainly, it rained a lot when I was there, but I actually I like springtime in Ireland and Scotland. Like, even though there's a lot of rain, it tends to be intermixed with little bursts of sunshine, which makes everything so pretty. It probably gets tiresome for those who live in it, but when I was there, I really liked it. Well, Fort Worth had power, but not treated water. Dallas, I think, Denton was out of power for sure. Green users, so I think it's variable problems depending on where you are. I texted with Zach yesterday, my ex, and he said they'd been without power for a while, and he lives right down the road from Reaper, and just a little ways from Ed's. So I kind of assume that Denton has been without power, but he had water. So yeah, I think it's gonna vary. It's just crazy. Oh, Houston has a water treatment plant out too. Ooh, that means my friends in Houston are probably also going through crazy right now. All my Texas friends, I'm so sorry. I would have you here with me, except that my apartment is too small. We would be very cramped. I'm mixing I mixed up some pure white. I mixed up a mix of the pure white and the cyan and white mix I already had. I'm going to see how much detail I can get on these eyeballs. So I've got a couple of different mixes here. 2-to-1 cyan blue and white. This is pure black, 4-to-1 with water. I'm about to mix it up. This is more like a pure white, about 1-to-1 with water, because pure white. And then this mixed with that makes this. Well, keep in mind, Nomad Zeke, that Texans don't have to deal with this sort of thing usually. So they don't necessarily know how all their stuff works. They just know that it works. Like, isn't that a science fiction writer thing? Like, didn't somebody note that that's the problem with current technology, is that it outpaced us to the point where people knew that it worked, but very few people knew how it worked? Or many fewer than used to. Like, it used to be that everybody could fix their own car, and now it's like you have to be certified to mix your own car. Or fix your own car. Texas is going to have a lot to clean up. Yes, it is, Reverie. Yes, it is. And then I see them throwing blame on the clean energy sources, and I'm just raising my eyebrows here. Texas is trying to deflect and blame green energy, when actually it's the lack of winterization of their plants that's gotten them in this fix. But nobody likes to hear that. Yeah, the power issue is brutal. Yeah, it's when you lose power. Like, you can be all cozy during ice apocalypse as long as you have power, but then when you don't have that. I think I might go to Tiny Brush for this, guys. I think we're going to need Tiny Brush. Because I don't want to blorf up these eyeballs. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Crowley. Exactly. Yeah, I pretty much just, when I'm mixing, like, I'll just grab paint from one. I just mixed this up, transferred 2 brushes to that, and then mixed a brush full of white in. Maybe a couple. I just mixed it till it was kind of halfway between these two. So I want to highlight. I am, pretty fearless about dipping into one well to dip into another well and so forth. Because I have very little paint on my brush when I do it, I can get away with it, and I leave hardly any. There's a tiny trace of this pale blue in here, but it's tiny. It's magic. It's just magic. Just it's magic. Yeah, that's where I was saying, Neosho, I would just pack up the dogs, and at that point I would have just packed up, if I was still in Texas with Kiri, I would have packed up the dogs and the dog and just driven west until I got to a place with power. All right, let's see here. Let us put in we could do this 2 ways. We can try to highlight the blue eye and then put it in a pupil. I'm going to get this in focus, don't worry. Or we can try to highlight the eye in general Or we could try to, try to put in the pupil and then highlight the eye. Putting in the pupil and highlighting the eye is probably the hardest part. So maybe we will try to just put a highlight in there. And I may just need to go straight to my really light color. I don't know. We'll see. Eyes are so small on 28 mils, and I need to point this brush better. There. Eyes are so small on 28 millimeter that you really, doing a colored iris, unless it takes up the whole eye, is like out of the question usually for me. And it's going to be a stronger color in the lower part, but really, like, you've got no room here to do stuff. So all you can really do is kind of lighten the eyes, and then let's see here. I'm going to do black. When you do your pupil, you just want to come up from underneath. I've talked about this before, but I'll do it again. Make sure you've got enough paint on your brush. Make sure your brush comes to a very good natural point, like so. Come up from underneath, because what you want to do is use this eyelid to stop the brush. So, and always do it on the exhale. Make sure your brush is very wet. I'm reloading my brush right now because I've been talking. So even in that small amount of time, paint is going to dry on a brush this small. So paint on the exhale so you're relaxed. And I want that eye, when you have it, you can adjust it by going more toward the center. There. She looks growly now. She's like, I'm coming for you, whoever you are. So that's one eye. So now we have to look at our other eye and say, probably toward the middle. But I always start with kind of a dot toward the middle, and then I widen it, just like you guys saw me do. Thank you, green users. Yeah, we'll get the other one. Well, she's definitely about to, like, take on somebody, so she has to have that growly look. Let me get the other one. Again, you paint on the exhale because it relaxes you. Don't ever suck your breath in and hold it and then try to paint. Either paint when you are actively exhaling and relaxing, or exhale and then hold it. Same trick they teach people who are learning to shoot properly. I use the same trick for playing pool and getting off the shot cleanly. It's the same principle behind a whole bunch of different sports and activities. Get the start, just get that little dot, kind of look at if it's where you want it. I think it's where I want it. Reload brush to widen out dot. These eyes are nice and big, relatively speaking. I just complained about how small they were, but that's relative to like 54 or 72 millimeter or bust eyes. Widen it out just with little dabs. Keep the tip of your brush kind of nailed, though, into the top of the eye. So the pupil is much smaller here, so I'm going to have to broaden it. I was trying to make sure it was facing front, so she's looking the same direction. But now I need to widen it, so see how this is a wider pupil? More like a big cat's eye. This one is more pinpointed. Now if I lose my blue, which I did a little bit, first I'm going to make sure my pupil is appropriate. Then I'm going to go back in with my blue. So I'm going to go in with pale, pale blue. So a lot of white in my blue here. It needs to cover is why. If I'm going to adjust this eye and make that blue pop a little bit more so you can really see it, that needs to be really sharp. And what happened is probably that I didn't have the light blue as far down on this eye as I did on the other eye. So when I put that pupil in, it totally blocked out that light blue, and it made it a lot harder to see the color of the eye here. She's looking pretty good, though. I just want to adjust a little bit more. If I'm going to be messing around, I may as well keep messing around here. I think I'm probably going to... There we go. I think I'm probably going to have to just make that pupil a little bit stronger now. But now I've got that light blue in, so I should be able to make that pupil stronger without losing it. She's looking pretty good, but this side is still a little bit more narrow in the pupil. I want that pupil to be pretty solid, which is why I'm actually using pure black for it. So normally I use walnut, but since I'm using a darker color for the eye, i.e. I'm using blue, not white or off-white, I feel like I want that black. There. Yeah. She looks pretty angry. Yeah, I think that works. Now, the question is, can I get a highlight in there? Because everybody knows and curses the fact that really eyes come to life when you can fit that tiny white highlight in, the specular highlight. But I'm going to actually, I think I want a little more pupil. There we go. Because once I bring that highlight in, there we go. Once I bring that highlight in, it's going to wipe out a little bit of the pupil. So your pupils have to be pretty big. This is why when you're doing a normal human figure at this scale with eyeballs, you make the pupils probably a little bit bigger than they would normally be if you're planning to try the white highlight. Otherwise, you're going to wipe it out. Yeah, pretty much she's a grumpy cat right now. But she should be. She's about to fight. All right, let's grab our white. Do I need it a little stronger, I wonder? I'm going to try to dot the base. You can always test it. That's pretty bright. I think that might work. Test your white. When you're about to do this, do test your white, because you need it thin. This is about a 1-to-1. Maybe it's a 1.5-to-1 paint to water with the pure white. You want it thin because you need it to come off your brush so very thin. And, but you want it to be strong, too. It has to be strong enough to give you that highlight. To give you that light, the light in the eyes, like that. And even so, it got a little bit strong over here. I could probably tune it down just a little. When you have really fine motor control, and the way that you get this fine motor control, people, is you try this stuff. Like, they always, you know, I probably say this more than anything, and you guys are sick of hearing it, but all the hard stuff is the stuff that makes you better. Trying to paint little if you never try to paint little details, you will not get better at little details. It's like when you're sculpting. If you never try to sculpt little tiny bits of detail, then you're not going to get better at it. So don't be afraid of doing this, but this is why I recommend that you get the faceless horror model from Reaper. Get it in bones. It's only like $7 in bones. It's a big monstrous demonic flesh beast with eyes and mouths in it. And it gives you a ton of eyes of different sizes to practice on without worrying about it. So you don't have to worry about messing up your miniature. Hold on, I gotta actually stop talking while I can adjust this pupil, because this is gonna be a really fine little brush stroke. There we go. Perfect. Perfect! There's your eyes. Your growly eyes. Yeah, she's definitely grumpy. Somebody has interrupted her in the middle of something, and she is very grumpy, and she's about to give them what for. I am all for this. I think it's awesome. Yay, grumpy kitty. We don't usually get to paint a grumpy cat. This is definitely getting close to grumpy cat land. Let's see here. There are places I want a little extra lining while I have some black out. I usually don't use black for lining because it's very, very cartoony, but here I might want a stronger line a couple places. And I also still need to consider how high, if I want to take this armor up. But I probably want to get the gold and the leather in before I figure out if I want this armor to be brighter. But yeah, the eyes are there. Yeah. Yeah, there were 129 eyes on that. Yeah, so because Julie Greenuser sculpted that one too. So the faceless horror, honestly, guys, go and look it up on Reaper. It's the eye and teeth monster. It is what I used when I taught eyeball classes, and it is what I highly recommend. Even doing like 10 or 12 eyeballs you're gonna see improvement as you work them, right? And so, and the nice thing is they have eyeballs as little as hers, but also eyeballs like big eyeballs. So you can practice at like a 28 millimeter scale or a 54 or a 72, you know. With eyeballs, if you never do them, you'll never get better at them. So grab a Faceless Horror, because then that takes the pressure off. You're not doing the eyeballs on the figure you just spent 5 hours painting. You're doing the eyeballs just for practice. It takes the stress out of it so that you can relax and learn and get confident with it. Then when you're confident with it, come back and do a kick butt set of eyes like this kitty has. Yeah, exactly, Francis. I'm not the only person who like says the Faceless Horror is the eye practice model. So get it. Yeah, exactly. Teeth are a lot less difficult than eyes, though, in my opinion. Because usually when you've got, like, claws or teeth or things, they're very, very small. They really just need, like, a base and a little bit of a highlight. Like, I might highlight with my pure white on the tips of these little claws to make them really, really stand out. But there isn't a whole lot you can do with claws and teeth at this scale. They're just tiny. So they're quite simple at that point. When you get bigger, then you can do fun stuff. Like texturing it, but it has to be much larger than this. Morning. Oh, that's fine, Val. It doesn't matter. I had forgotten it already. That happens all the time for Reaper, even. We go to raid somebody and they're already raiding somebody else. I thought it was fun. It's like, whee! It is, in other words, not something you need to apologize for. Val, you need to stop apologizing. Sometimes stuff happens, and it's not your fault. Get into this mindset. I get very annoyed when people blame themselves for stuff that isn't their fault. Happens so much, too. Don't blame yourself for painting bad eyes. Well, okay, unless you totally avoid, like, you know, trying to paint eyes. Then you should blame yourself. And only yourself. But you shouldn't, like, beat yourself up over it. You should just go buy a Faceless Horror. Hey, John, if you're there, can you pop the link to the Faceless Horror from the store into the chat, please? If you have a moment. Assuming it's not Justin. In which case, Justin, could you? But I would like that link to be popped up so that it's easy for folks. Because really, seriously, guys, if you want to learn to paint eyes better, get that model. And since we don't allow other people to link in our chat, it has to be one of the Reaper peeps. Faceless Horror by Julie Guthrie. Alright, since I have some black and some white, I'm just cleaning up my stones here on the bottom. And at this point, I probably could base, since I have the black out, I could do the edge of the base, even. I could pull my sticky tack down a little bit. Although usually I'll wait until I take the model off of the sticky tack. Thanks for the SKU, Inara. Well, if you have a printer, you could do it that way, but, you know, or you could just buy one from Reaper, and you're done. Because I don't know if there's any other, I mean, maybe there are other models out there cool that have this many different eyes of different sizes. That's why the Faceless Horror is so valuable when you're learning eyes, is not only that it has a bunch of eyes, but that they're all different scales. So that you can really practice and see what you can do. Because you can do a lot more with a larger eye. You can do the colored iris with everything, you know. Whereas with small eyes, you're going to find it very difficult unless you artificially enlarge the eye with paint. Do some paint plastic surgery. I'm just going to put the black rim on here to remind myself. Raid train, is that what it's called? That's funny. I think it's just that at that time of day, like everybody in this hemisphere is kind of quitting probably to have dinner, or, you know, they're like, hey, I want to relax for the last couple hours of my evening or whatever, depending on what time zone they're in. Or it's time to go to bed. So I think that's why we have a hard time finding a raid at that time of night. Because, you know, it's... When I quit, it's supper time in, you know, the middle of the country. And probably post-supper relax time or late supper time in the East Coast. So I think that's why we just don't have a lot of people to raid that late. There we go. Just wanted to do that black rim. I think it makes the model look neater. I haven't yet decided how she's going to be based. We may just leave her on this base and not do a fancy base for her. Oh boy. I mean, technically this one wouldn't be a bad bet for NMM armor, but I mean, you usually want something. What I typically say is the Templar models, War Shadow, Bobby Jackson's Templars. They were Warlord from the Warlord line. There are a lot of beautiful models that you could practice NMM on. They're older sculpts, but they are armored knights pretty much. So my favorites are like Sir Malcolm, Sir Duke Gerard. There's a bunch of really nice female models. Christiana, who's like a female, she's the battle nun with the 2 swords. Yay! Twisted Oma, you have power again. That's fantastic. That's excellent. I'm going to have to stretch earlier than usual, you guys. Woke up with a stiff neck, and that's such a pain in the butt. All right, good. So we got our black. Got a nice black rim around our base, at least to start with. Now I can focus on, let's figure out how far up I'm going to take this leather. So I need some ruddy leather, and I need something to highlight ruddy leather with. And usually that means a burnt orange. So ruddy leather. Oh, that's mahogany brown. It deceived me. Ruddy leather is its friend. It's right next to it, though. So 109, ruddy leather. We're using we started out with like walnut or black and brown, and we're going to take it up reddish. And the reason we're doing that is complementary color schemes. So we've got a lot of green here. So if we go up reddish on the armor, that green and red are going to kind of complement each other. So that's the way we're doing it. We're also putting some orange in there, though, and that'll work just fine because we also have blue accents. But yeah, War Shadow I mean, it really depends on what you're trying to do with NMM. Like the other one I like is the Orc Berserker with the sword, the 2-handed sword up behind his head. He's really, I've used him because he's got both chainmail and he's got big defined plates on his front and is a rounded surface. So I think that he's a really good practice as far as like the figuring out rounded surfaces and breastplate areas. I think he's a really good one. And then he's got the sword as well. So I think that I don't remember his item number, but I've painted him on stream before and I actually did rust effects on him, I believe. He's really good for trying shaded metallics or NMM because his plates are so big. You can do good shaded metallics on him. So yeah. But I mean, when it comes down to it, what you want, if you're going to practice non-metallic metal, is you want a model with very clearly sculpted plates that are different kind of shapes, right? Because you got to practice how you're going to highlight different areas. And this model's not bad for it because she's got, here on the legs, you're going to get this this wraparound is more, you highlight this as a cylinder. And then the knee pads and the breastplates are going to be rounded surfaces, right? And then you've got more kind of a semi-rounded but still kind of flat surface on the shoulder. So you've got a bunch of different areas here on the model that you could paint as metal if you wanted to. In a lot of fantasy figures, what can be suggest like leather kind of boiled leather, shaped leather plates can also be painted just fine as metal. And so it's just up to you what you want to practice on. So yeah, that's my take on it. So let's go, ruddy leather. I think I may have addicted David to WoW. The servers were down last night for a restart, which may or may not have been weather related, but they did rolling restarts last night. And I swear he was like an addict without his fix. Is he listening? No, he's on a meeting. We're good. He apologized to me afterwards for being so into WoW. And it's just like, the only reason I'm not there with him rating and all this stuff is because my back has been bad, and WoW is one of the agitators. So, yeah, NMM does work for larger figures, Red Links. Kirill does it all the time. Kirill Knave. If you look him up on Facebook, you'll get an eye-opener. He's amazing. He's my favorite painter. But even people, I mean, most of the European painters will do NMM on larger figures, like 75 mil, even on busts. I mean, okay, busts. Where, here you go. This is not finished, Red Links. But I'm doing NMM on this. So she's going to have Sky Earth NMM on her lion guard. I didn't get any work done on her this weekend because I was working on a different model. But yeah, so you can absolutely make NMM work on huge models. Like this is probably the biggest bust that I would do it on. Now, the other thing to consider though, Red Links, is that often on large models like busts, if there's not a bunch of detail filigree, then true metallics work as well or better. Like I think they really give you an awesome effect. But that model has such tight detail on that shoulder pad. If I had done that with metallics, it just wouldn't be as crisp. And so when I saw that model, I knew I wanted to do Sky Earth on it because of all the detail. So with a simpler model, like my Mr. Grumpy model, did I put Grumpy back? I did. But with a simpler model like Grumpy, hold on, let me grab Grumpy. Grumpy, where are you? He was on top of my bench until recently. I always show Grumpy. But Grumpy's the best metals, best breastplate I've done. Even Kirill said I did a good job. So like you can do, here Grumpy, get a little bit further back. So that's true metallics. But you can see what you can do with metallics at such a huge scale, right? You've got room to do all the little scratches. You've got room to do weathering. So I always say I really love shaded metallics on big models. But notice how simple this breastplate is. It's really just a sheet of metal with a little bit of detailing on it. And so because of that, you have a lot of room to do this sort of detail. Whereas on Templar Girl, you know, she's not quite as big. Here's Templar Girl. She's not as large of a scale. You can see the difference in head size. But you can also see how much more detail she has on her lion, you know, than with him. Now, her breastplate is simple, but then you've got all this filigree at her throat. You can see all the detailing that I have to paint in. And then these kind of feathery shapes going up the side. And then more detail over here. And then you've got chainmail. When you've got that much metal detail, true metallics, I feel, is not as effective. Because you don't have the room. The real strength for me for shaded metallics is the ability to do this sort of thing when you've got enough room for it. And so that's how I make my call on busts. As far as, am I going to go with metal here? Or am I going to go with NMM? Let me put him back. And if I'm going to do any sort of lighting effect whatsoever, the answer is always NMM. Always. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Red Links. So you can do that sort of effect with metallics, but if you've got a lot of detail that's like metal that's, you know, sculpted or enameled or you know, filigreed or any sort of fine detail, then I would go NMM. And if you're going to do a lighting effect of any sort with directed light from the side, like if you've got anything other than an overhead light source or a slightly oblique overhead light source, then I would also go NMM, because the problem with trying to do a light source that's like from the side or underneath with true metallics is that when you're looking at that model in the real world, you're going to have overhead light up above you from your environment. So it's going to work against your effect. So think about that when it depends on how much control you want your light sourcing. It depends on how much detail you have to bring out on the model. Now you can do fine detail with metallics. I just find it's a lot harder to bring out fine detail with metallics. So up to you. Try it, decide if you like it. That's always the bottom line. All right. Leather. Oh yeah. Hey, I'm going to use goblin skin. Remember goblin skin? It's my new favorite burnt orange. And burnt orange is what I always use to highlight ruddy leather. So we're going to try this and see if it works nicely. Much of Kitty's leather has already been kind of highlighted with ruddy leather. But I'm going to thin that down. I'm going to transfer some of it over to a secondary well. Boop. So just a couple of this is my big mixing brush that I don't care about because it lost its tip long ago, more or less. Then I'm going to put a couple drops of goblin skin in. We'll see what color that makes. I always want to do a transition color. That's a pretty color. It's a nice reddish leather color. If I want it to bleach out a little bit, I will add something like bleached linen or pure white as well. There was a little white in the goblin skin. We're going to add bleached linen, just like 1 drop. There. So you got, okay, so I've mentioned this before, but you have choices here when you're layering up highlights, guys. If I wanted to work with thicker paint, I could just keep these colors as is without adding that white. But if I want to thin down my paint and do some thinner highlights, then I can go with more drama. So there. That's a great leather color right there. Kind of orangey and faded. Looks like hide. I like it. I'm actually going to go and mix a little bit of that back into my ruddy leather. What? Cross-pollination? Yes, always. So now this will be my new highlight color. And that will be another one. Jabberwock, it's up to you if you do not want to embrace the power of goblin skin. It's so versatile, though. It's more versatile than other burnt oranges. And burnt oranges are what, like I said, what I tend to use to highlight leather on when it's brown or reddish. Burnt orange is also a great color for mixing skin tones. But that's more advanced, you know, not as immediately applicable. I always love it for highlighting leather, though. And it, again, like color choices, I won't try to sell you on it because color choices are like a personal thing, and because your colors that you end up gravitating toward somewhat define your style as a painter. Painters who use very, very saturated palettes like Sergio or Luca versus painters who go with very muted palettes like Jennifer Haley used to. It still actually kind of does. And I even depend a lot on neutral, naturalistic colors, right? I like some bright poppy colors, but I tend to go more natural, less saturated. I like softer colors. I like Kitty here is actually a great example of what Anne likes to do. Because my greens are actually softer. I'm using a lot of browns and natural earth colors, and I'm using a more saturated color to pop. So, hey, miniatures dad. Speaking of the devil, Luca. Hey, Luca, I saw your NMM, the gold NMM or the bronze NMM breastplate on that Spartan. Looks pretty hot. I was watching you. I called David over to see it because it looked very Sergio to me, and David loves Sergio. Is his favorite painter. So I thought I really liked it. It reminds us all how dark we need our shadows to go to really make metals look dynamic. We're doing Kitty, though. Kitty is much more simple and small. But yes, welcome. Yeah, no problem, Luke. I always like when we have you up right as I'm getting ready to come on, because then I can spend a few minutes just watching what you're doing. And I always enjoy your style. Like, it's far more like high drama than my style is, but that's why I enjoy it, because it's different for me when I try to paint that way. Yes. Hey there, everybody. For those of you who love Luca and have not yet met me, I am Anne. I work for Reaper Miniatures, obviously, because I'm doing their show. I created Reaper's paint line, Master Series, so if you are familiar with it, I did that. I worked for Reaper on site for 15 years making the paint line, and I was also a staff painter during that time. So now that I'm out on the West Coast, I am working for them remotely doing this stream. Welcome. This is Shadoweyes, Catfolk Rogue by Julie Guthrie. She is. Julie's in the chat with us today. Julie and her partner Bob Rodolfi, who also is a Reaper sculptor. So we have some cool stuff that we can get Julie's take on sometimes on the models that she has designed. Let's see here. We were just about to start on leather. I'm bringing up the leather here. I just did the eyes. So we just did Kitty's eyes. She's a very grumpy cat, we decided. I'm going to get closer. There she is. Grumpy cat. Yes, green users in the chat is Julie and Bob. And they do sculpt traditionally in green still, and for larger models, I think Julie said Fimo. There are some of the sculptors that have not gone digital for Reaper. Reaper has many sculptors working in the digital sculpting arena. but Bob and Julie still do it with green, which is very useful and cool when we're trying to do conversion stuff and sculpting stuff on here, because then we can get some direct feedback about how we're doing it wrong. So I'm going to just kind of go a little bit irregular here. There are folds sculpted into this bag, and there's a limit to how much texture you can suggest for leather on a 28 millimeter scale. But in general, if you see creases that are sculpted in the object, try to hold with those. And you can use a little bit of stippling if you want to kind of suggest a bit of scatter, like creased leather would have. You know, it's got those smaller creases in addition to the big creases. So if you use some stippled highlights and a softer highlighting style like up here, you can get a little bit of the suggestion of the leather texture. In general, it's much easier to do tighter textures on larger scale models. So there is a limit to what you can really suggest realistically on a 28. You're funny, Jabberwock. All right, so let's get back into this. So I'm using today, I had base coated with a much darker brown. I think it was walnut or its cousin, black and brown, which is almost a black. And then I'm bringing it up with more of a reddish tone. I wanted to go really dark with the start, though. I wasn't sure how the green armor was going to turn out at that point, and so I wasn't sure how light I wanted the leather to be. I'm pretty confident now that we can make the leather stand out next to the green, even if they're in the roughly the same shade, which means roughly the same light versus dark. The fur is lighter, so that's giving us a little bit of contrast there. And we'll see how we might keep the leather a little bit darker at its root than the green. We may yet put another level of highlight on the green. I was going for green leather, but I could take that leather up shinier if I wanted to. I'm sorry, it did get eaten. What would cause a bottle of paint to be grainy and sludgy? Frozen. Yeah, especially in this weather cool pack, my guess is frozen. There's not a lot we can do to control that, although I would give Texas time to thaw before I asked for a replacement. But do contact Reaper customer service, which I think is questions at Reaper Mini. Is it info at Reaper Mini? What is it, John? John/Justin, are you listening? It might... You did. Okay, you good. You got it. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Nomad Zeke. Help at Reaper Mini. Reaper is very much, we understand that nobody can control the weather, and nobody can control if your paint gets left on a UPS truck in a, parking lot overnight. And paint is going to die when it gets out. I call that the cottage cheese effect. It'll granulate and it'll get clumpy. And it won't go back in solution. It might look like it goes back in solution when you stir it really strongly, but it really doesn't. And essentially what's happened is that the water in the paint has frozen and forced all the resins and pigment and other particulate solids out of solution. When paint is made, they need an extremely high velocity mixer to get all that stuff to go permanently, to emulsify into solution in the first place. So just you shaking it ain't gonna do it. It's permanently out. So that's what has happened chemically when a paint freezes. That's why all water-based paints have big notices on the side, whether it's house paint or anything else, saying do not freeze. Because it permanently will just wreck it. Yeah, you're not going to be able to, because you've got a chemical reaction essentially. You have an emulsification that's been forced out of solution. You won't be able to solve that problem. And on a bottle basis, nobody can solve that problem. If you had it happen in a big batch, like if a big paint mixing facility in Texas went offline with the electricity, and then they waited for everything to thaw and they restarted that big centrifugal mixer that goes at a super high velocity, they could get it to go back in solution. They could probably salvage it, assuming none of the resins are affected adversely by cold, which I don't think they are, but you just never know. I don't know enough. I know enough paint chemistry to get myself in trouble. I am not a paint chemist, so that's a question mark for me. But yeah, a normal person. You ordered some Chimera paints? Well, just hope, Varl, since those are shipping from Europe and Europe is not currently an ice ball like Texas is, just cross your fingers that since it's going to take time for them to get over the ocean anyway, that in that time, much of the world will thaw slightly and you will not run into problems. I'm actually going to mix another highlight color here. So we started with ruddy leather. We added some goblin skin. I'm actually going to take do what I always do, which is take my previous highlight, transfer a couple of big brushfuls over to another well, and mix a new highlight. So since we added a bit of goblin skin, which is a very nice burnt orange, but as you can see, it's darker, we're going to drop another drop of goblin skin into this to keep it going orange and warm. But we are also going to put another drop of our bleached linen to bring up another highlight. Yeah, the more barrier you put between the outside of the package and the paint inside, the more likely, the longer it's going to take the cold to penetrate that. So you can, if you think it's going to ship fairly quickly, then you can take your chances on that by the extra padding, Chibi. So I'm mixing up a new highlight. I don't want to go too orange. I think this is about as orange as I'm going to go. This is almost a skin tone at this point. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it depends on how cold it gets. Negative 47 is like, that's a temperature that shouldn't exist. Should not exist. Oh, hey, it's stretch time, guys. Remember, after you've been sitting for an hour, and I have been sitting for an hour, and my back is feeling it today, so I am going to stand up and stretch a bit. And then we will put our next leather highlight on, and we'll work across the entire miniature so that we can get that leather set. So I'm going to do my stretchies. Anybody else who's been sitting for more than half an hour to an hour or even longer, please stand up and stretch with us. This is something relatively new since I put my back out, 3 weeks ago. And then I've had to kind of crawl back into normal functionality. So I found it useful to institute a stretch break in my show, which is an hour and a half, and that's a long time to stay frozen in one position. So I've tried to also apply this to my normal painting, so that when I set my time to take breaks as I paint. Yeah, I hope the paint is okay. I hope I'm still alive. Right, exactly. True hobbyist. Yeah, negative 47 is just an indecent temperature. Like, it's kind of like plus 130. Like, I like heat, but my heat tolerance starts to ebb at 110. Like, I've been out at 108, and it was definitely hot, even for me. And that was with some humidity, since it was in Texas and not Arizona. Alright, I'm going to do a little bit of cow cat on the floor, and then we can resume. Do some stretches. Stretch out your spine, everybody. And your shoulders, and your poor necks. All right, we are ready. I think I'm good. I'm gonna do one more kind of punch the wall behind me kind of thing, which I like lately. All right, we're here. So yeah, I hope everybody took that time to stretch or to get up and get yourself a glass of water or a latte or whatever the heck, is your kind of thing. My hair's all springy. And hydrate. That's the other thing. Hydrate good. All right, we're good. Now we can resume. Well, then you just got 15 pounds of sleeping feline to enable you to do some weight training as well as stretching, Korniko. No excuses. It's a little early for that, Val. Back with the granny glasses. We are armed and dangerous. All right, let's get some leather. Let's get some leather going. Oh, thanks, Farce. The Farce returns. You have a good name, too. Yes, I'm glad you like it. I try to get very close and detailed with my camera work, so closer than I see a lot of painters get. online. So I like to show people the brush strokes and the blurfs. When I make a mistake, then you see it, which is not infrequent. Everybody makes mistakes. I think the difference between like a pro painter and like a new painter is not the number of mistakes they necessarily make, but how they react to them. Most of the pros I know are just like, well, dang it, and then we fix it. We just don't waste a lot of energy on it, right? Whereas I think a lot of newer painters can get very disheartened by mistakes. But in reality, I mean, you can use that mistake to learn something, so. And the something that you learn is not that you suck, it's that, you know, hey, I did this and it didn't work, let's figure out why. Your cat was not impressed. Yeah, Kirinico's cats seem to like me. Like, maybe they like chasing kind of, because the brush goes, you know, does little motions on the screen. It's like a laser pointer, only TV for cats. So, like I said, you can do a bit of stippling, little dots to suggest some texture. There is not a lot you can do at this scale, but the little bit of stippling will help to give you kind of an irregular highlight. Yeah, you learned that you could fix it, exactly. It's really important not to obsess over your mistakes. Even if you have to like kind of step away from the mini for a while, even a few months, kind of put it on a shelf until you have the energy to fix it. Until you look at it one day and you're just like, you know what? It wouldn't take too much to fix that. And then I really like that model and now I want to get back to it. That happens to David all the time, my boyfriend. He's like, He'll run into a part of the model where he's just not liking it, or he's having a problem with a specific part of it that he doesn't like. And he'll put it aside for months, sometimes. Probably sometimes years. I think he picked up one that he hadn't touched in years the other day. But he keeps them all kind of on the shelf, so he kind of sees them from time to time. And on occasion, his interest will respark. So don't feel like, you know, there's something wrong with you if you lose interest in a model and want to put it aside. It's okay. All right, I'm going to kind of... There's a plate that kind of wraps on top of another, it looks like, here. I can't decide. Yeah, it's on both sides. So the leather kind of wraps around. So I'm going to emphasize this edge now. I'm going to grab some of my liner and make sure I don't lose that. We were working on a paint app for a while, but I think it was more of a color sorter. The biggest tips for beginners for a rank beginner, if you're like super new, my biggest tips are always put your mini on a holder so that you don't rub paint off of it. If you take decent care of your brushes, don't leave your brushes tipped down in the paint water, but the minute you get to decent brush care levels, get a good brush, a really good quality sable brush that keeps a great tip. Because using cheaper brushes will work for you for a while, but when you switch to a really good brush, you're going to see yourself level up pretty much instantaneously. Because it's the really good brushes that enable you to get the paint to go exactly where you want it on the mini. In line with that, though, a really good brush doesn't do you any good if you're not thinning your paint a little bit. Because at least with a really thin brush like this, the paint is going to want to dry in that really thin brush unless you put some water in it. So I have my paint thinned a bit. So you learn to add some water to your paint to get it to the consistency you like. If you're working with a wet palette, then you're going to be pulling water directly from the surface of your palette. If you're working from a well palette like I do, then you're going to be adding water to the paint once it's in the palette. So thin your paint, work with a good brush as soon as you learn to like not leave your brushes in the paint water. And very little paint on your brush is the final tip. So when I am loading up my brush here, I am dipping it in like that much. You can see the paint on the tip. And then I'm taking it off. I'm actually dabbing. Even though I only put a little paint on it, I'm now taking almost all that paint off so that I have a natural tip. Then I'm applying the paint. Then I'm stippling on highlights. Let's take this out of frame. So then I'm applying it. And what that lets me do is the paint is still wet on here, but it's very controlled. I can do very fine lines with it. I can hit fine dots. I could highlight all these little rivets, no problem. Because there's so little paint on the brush that it's not going to come off in a big blob or a puddle. So I have control. And when you're painting 28mm, control is king. Not having blobs, essentially not having your paint run off your brush weirdly is a huge step toward less frustration and better miniatures. So very little paint on your brush, thin your paint a little, and the reason hand in hand, thinning paint goes hand in hand with very little paint on your brush. Because if you're using very thick paint and you only load a little paint on your brush, you're actually going to have problems. The paint isn't going to want to come off. Like, the surface tension will be too great still. When you add a little bit of water, especially to Reaper paint, which already has flow improver in it, then you enable that paint to stay wet on your brush for longer and to operate on this thinner brush a little bit better. So there's a direct correlation between paint consistency and the thinness or thickness of brush that you use and the type of palette that works best for you. There's a direct correlation based on fluid dynamics. So thicker brush, thicker paint. Big thick brush, big thick paint. And probably a wet palette at that point. Thin, razor thin brush with long narrow tip like I love. Thin brush, thin paint. And probably a well palette. In general. I'm sure there are people who push the boundaries of all this. But in general, if you are starting, keep those things in mind. Oh no, Kuroniko. Thanks, Inara. Yeah, I forgot. I always forget about those. But in general, those are the 4 tips that I always tell new people is thin your paint, even if it's just a little. Get yourself a good brush as soon as you can. Use something to hold your miniature on top of that you can hold comfortably so that you don't handle the miniature. And very little paint on your brush if you're working with thin paint. Very little paint. The less paint on your brush, the less likely it is to come off in a giant gloop. If you just follow those, your painting will improve. After that, it's mostly just painting. Jason. It's mostly just getting the practice in. The more you paint, the better your brush control is going to get. Do try to kind of keep your stroke, your brush stroke. Be conscious of your brush stroke. And don't always be doing like going all around on different angles and trying to do this. Don't always be doing that. Try to get kind of a comfortable stroke that feels good for your hand and stick to it. And then if you need to reach a different part of the model, move the model around so that you can still comfortably use that same stroke. That is going to build brush control a lot faster for you. Yeah, no problem. I like to teach people who are new to the hobby. I like to teach people who are intermediate looking to get better. I find sometimes that there's some the very simple physics of the actions are not discussed a lot in the hobby. Like the whole, thin paint, thinner brush kind of thing, where if you use thin paint, thinner brushes will give you more mileage. There's a reason that when I was doing the eyes on this character at the beginning of this stream, I went from this giant brush that I've been using for the leather to this little tiny brush that I was using for the eyes. And the reason is that with thin paint, if you want ultimate control, moving to a smaller brush, even though it doesn't hold as much paint, if you're trying to do a tiny detail like the eyes, it works better for you and gives you more control than trying to control thin paint on a giant brush like this. And this is a Raphael 1, and this is a Da Vinci Maestro 3. So I switch back and forth now. I used to do everything with a brush that is kind of in the middle of those two, and on occasion I still do. The brush that I used for competition painting for like 20 years is a Da Vinci Maestro Series 10 size 1. And that is a brush that is halfway between these two in size. And so I found... There we go. Sorry, my other brush has dried out and gotten less of a good tip on it. So there's my 3 brushes. So the one in the middle is the one that I used for years and years, for decades of competition painting. I used the same brush size, same brush brand, and I did everything with that brush. But now I'm finding that I get just as good mileage out of using a larger brush for a lot of the painting and then going to the tiny brush for very small details. But the tiny brush is only of limited usage when you're doing like a lot of work, like you're doing over like a lot of leather over a broad area and you want to keep painting over a lot of area. Hey, Drowcree, thank you for the resub. 13 month. It's your subiversary +1. Too much paint on a spot and then get frustrated and leave it. Yeah, so then it's unloading, brush unloading. Actually, Jason, if you want, there's a free video tutorial I did, a class that I did for ReaperCon. That's called Thinning MSP Paints. And it's free, and it's up on Reaper's YouTube. If you just go on Reaper's YouTube and search for Thinning MSP Paints, then you'll find it. And it'll talk about this. It talks about loading and unloading, because loading your brush is great, but you also need to unload it. And that's what gives you the control. Because if you've got, even that little blob of paint that I had at the beginning, even if you have this much paint on your brush, it's too much when you're working on something this small. Might not be too much when you're working on a bust or something, but it is definitely too much when you're trying to get, say, if you're trying to like define this leather line here and you want a really fine, thin line, then you want very little paint on your brush. So really just start unloading your brush a bit more. And like I said, in the thinning MSP paint thing, I do talk about that. And it's I think it's an hour class, hour and a half class. But yeah, so you can find that, and that is free. It's free forever. It's going to stay up forever. But it's the class I did for ReaperCon last year. But yeah, paint control is a big hurdle for new painters, right? Because you have to kind of learn from scratch, especially if you've got no art background. But even if you do have an art background, like I do, it's still difficult. So what I did, guys, I brought in a dark line behind that highlight I just brought in so that we can make sure we see the overlapping leather. And the same on this side. Yeah. Derek, Studio DKS is Derek Schubert. He's a Reaper staff painter and sculptor, a skater, or a pulpter, depending on how you want to call him. He is a pro. He is super good. Listen to that man. Listen to the Studio DKS person. Yeah, some unload, yeah. So it depends on where you want to unload your brush. I unload on the palette itself. Marika uses her thumb. Derek uses white paper. What you do want to do is not unload on something, though, that's got a lot of fibers in it. So, like, Kleenex is right out. Paper towel I tend to avoid unless it's damp. If it's damp and it's, like, a high-quality paper towel. A damp sponge can work. Anything that's not going to change the paint consistency appreciably. White paper works where paper towel doesn't work, because paper towel will wick fluid out of your brush at the same time as you're taking your pigment off. So... whereas the white paper Derek uses isn't immediately absorbent. He can essentially use it as if it's like this palette, and it works that way. So don't use a really, really absorbent surface to wick paint off of your brush, or it'll become thicker even as you lose volume. If you are getting bubbles when you're base coating, you probably are using a brush that's too stiff. Sometimes I'll get some bubbles if I'm going really fast with a big brush and thin paint. And what that is actually it's surfactants. It's a thing in your paint that actually holds your paint together. So when we were talking about how when paint freezes, it falls out of solution. So surfactants are the thing that glues everything together in paint. And after you move your paint at a really high velocity mixing speed, the surfactants will glom onto everything and it'll hold everybody together. And surfactants are essentially soap. It's the same stuff that's in your soap. So it makes bubbles just like soap does. That's how I had a chemistry ex-boyfriend. He was a chemist going for his graduate degree, and he told me that. He's like, yeah, surfactants, they're soap. So your paint has soap in it. Well, or it has something that is an equivalent type of compound. That's why you get bubbles. All right, so we're bringing up our highlights here on our arm guards for Grumpy Cat, Grumpy Kitty. Gonna pick up kind of when you've got studs like this. One thing you can do is do what I just did, whereas kind of bring up a sharp highlight underneath that stud, because it's going to be punched into the leather, and then essentially immediately underneath it, the leather's going to kind of bulge out, right? Because it got punched into. So you can do that kind of highlight on the lower rim around a studded leather. You don't want to do it with these guys down here necessarily because they're in shadow. Depends on like kind of your lighting situation, but you can hit that highlight there right beneath the studs and kind of highlight it with a little bit of extra oomph to show that detail, right? See how that makes those look like they're recessed? So, oh yeah. I mean, chemistry is chemistry. Compounds are compounds. Things are so much the same. Paint is glue. Paint is soap. You know, we use so many things that are chemically a lot more similar than you think they are. Although I bet the surfactants that they use in coatings, industrial coatings, are very different ones than they use in paint. The ones in paint will really vary. Like, you pick a surfactant to go with the resin and the pigment. Like, different surfactants will work better or worse for certain types of pigments and certain chemicals, you know. So, which is part of the reason some paint lines mix well together and some don't, is that the surfactant could be different and may not apply to the opposing base. All right, so we got some nice little speckles going on there. Maybe a little bit too much texture. I'm going to go back in with my slightly darker, kind of do some stipples down in the shadow area and break up the stipples up here a little bit. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I want a little bit of texture, but I don't want it to look like rocks. Like, keep in mind, again, we're back to, you can do very minimal texture on 28 and to have it look right. And when you go overboard, it's going to just look like big clumps of sand or something. So that's when you know that you need to go back in and kind of back off that texture. Here we just want kind of a subtle idea that this leather is rough and worn. Yeah, just as easy as putting paint on steel, which is not easy. Yes, exactly. Uh-huh. I get it, Jason. Oh yeah, we have several software developers, I think, watching these streams. Mostly because you guys get to work from home a lot during the pandemic, and you can listen to the stream while you're coding or reading, troubleshooting code. Your job's transitioned well. That was a blorble in David's Discord, not mine. If you guys heard a Discord, it was not you, it was David. His computer, he forgot to mute it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Twisted Oma. Yeah, since March 17th. Yeah, David has been too, Cookie. Because out here, he started working from home right before I moved out, and I moved out the first week of April. Oh, okay. So let's see. What do I need to do? I still need to do a bit more work on this bag here. It needs a bit more leather there. I haven't touched this hip. I haven't gone up there. I decided not to go blue with this little bracelet. I don't think I want to go metal either. I think the only thing really shiny about her are going to be her blades. So this little leather armlet is going to stay leather. It might have gold rims on it, though. She might have a little bit of bling on it, but not much. She doesn't want people to see her too easily. Yeah, we kind of did the whole, like, blue sky. I wanted to suggest that she was in an alley. Like, she's at the mouth of an alley coming out. Coming out to get some payback on whoever, you know, this guy that made her mad, or this gal that made her mad. She's got that grumpy kitty look. Grumpy kitty is coming for you. This is Grumpy Cat if he wasn't a couch potato and if he was in D&D. Or she. I think Grumpy Cat was a girl, wasn't he? Wasn't she? Because I think she had kittens at one point and there were grumpy kittens. I saw a picture of that. Oh, cool. Oh, neat, Cookie Tigress. Well, that's really awesome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you've discovered the hobby. That's super exciting. You're brand new. That's so exciting. You have so much awesome ahead of you. Yeah. Yes, you have so much awesome ahead of you. That I get so excited when people that are really, really new to the hobby discover it and get into it, because you're at the exciting point. Like, to you, it might feel like you're kind of at the frustrating point, but you can only go up from there. Like, you could. There's no limit on what you can do. It's just super exciting. I get excited for it. So I'm going to hit a little bit of a highlight up here on the top. And on the side, I want to kind of define the shape of the bag because it's kind of hard to see sometimes if it's, you know, everything is the same shade here, right? You've got a darker green, you've got a darker leather. So in order to bring those details out, you've got to make sure you define the edges a little bit visually so that you can see things. It helps that they are complementary colors with the reddish leather and the green armor, but sometimes you need a little more than that. And I also probably need to really define this strap. I'm probably going to bring in my black really thin and make sure that it's clear that the strap is all the way from the up here to down there. Sometimes with bones, details can get a little bit muddy, so you gotta do that extra bit. Oh, okay, yeah, me too, Cookie Tigress. Like, I was doing that when I was a kid. My brother and I both played around with, I should say, model cars. And so the first mini I painted was with Tester's paint. Enamels. Alright, let's get this black line in here. Normally I don't line with black, but sometimes you need it to do that extra punch if you're working with a very dark thing. There we go. Now we've got more of an idea that is separate, and I'm going to actually come up right on top of the little hinge, the little catch-up on top too. There, and I'm going to define this little catch more at the bottom here. Or the little accent, I should say, the little metal accent at the end there. There, now that has all been lined. It's a lot clearer. I like that better. Okay. Subiversary! Whoa, Pendrake! Happy Subiversary, happy Subiversary, happy Subiversary, happy Subiversary. There you are. The whole Subiversary song for Pendrake. And now I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight on these guys. Just a little bit of bling. A little bit of highlight to kind of bring out that there's metal there. There, that's better. Yes, Year of Subness. Office kayaking, that's cool. Yeah, David's office used to do a lot more fun stuff like that for team building. But of course, yeah, not since the disease came. I think I'm going to bring my highest highlight up a bit here and kind of bring up the edge of that bag. And I'm going to come down. Maybe I'm going to glaze with that. I think that's a good idea. I'm going to glaze with my light. So I'm going to essentially create a super thin layer of paint with this orange. I'm going to paint it over a limited area, the leather that I want to look lighter, to bring it all up a bit. And now it's got some pooling, so I'm going to rinse out my brush really quick and kind of wick off the moisture. Kind of touch the edges to pull that off. So what that's going to do is lighten that. See how it lightens the whole thing and kind of pulls it together. When you have that problem where you see you've got really dark shadows and you've got really light highlights and it doesn't look like it's going together, do a glaze with like your light. It's not for the faint of heart. Light glazing with a lighter color is harder than glazing with a dark transparent color, but it can pay dividends on this kind of thing where you need just a quick thing to pull your colors together. And putting a light color over the top is very effective because it's automatically more opaque. And so it quickly does the job, more quickly does the job of pulling things together. There. So that's made that bag. See how that's made that bag like really come together now? It's pull it out. You can still see detailing on it, and I can come in with the highlight color and still hit the edges a bit. Yeah, I mean, plastic glue is, melts the parts together. So yeah. If he had used super glue, then it would probably have worked, but boy, it would have off-gassed terrible. Like, it would have fumed you guys out of the area, probably. But yeah, plastic glues for plastic models work by melting the plastic together. Later, Shadow. Foods. Alrighty. We are almost there. We started 10 minutes late. So I want to go a couple minutes longer. Just trying to get this leather kind of... I'm going to put a light line down either side of the strap here. On a bigger model, you'd see wearing and cracking on the edges of the straps, and then cracking that goes across it. Sometimes, if it's really worn. On a model this small, it's too small to suggest that level of detail. But what you can do is put a light line on either side of the strap if you want to suggest that it's more worn. So this is paying attention to detail. You're like, why are we spending so much time on this tiny little strap that's only one little detail on a model and everything else is far more exciting than that bag? Well, this is the kind of attention to detail that you want to do. Like, you don't want to be like, oh, look at this kick butt model, and then the bag is just kind of a blob, right? You really don't want that kind of effect. You want everything to look cool. So now if I decide that now, and this can happen with really light paints, if it seems like things get chalky and I want more depth back on this, what I would do is glaze with my ruddy leather, because it's more of a transparent, and it's a lot more vibrant. So I could glaze again if I wanted to fine tune this color. If I wanted it more red, could glaze again with my ruddy leather to make the color go more red. And that's how you fix chalkiness. If you get it on your skin tones, for example, take your, whatever your base color was, which is going to be usually your darkest color with skin tones, and glaze with that. And it should help. Yeah, she's cute. She's just a great little model. She's got a lot of personality. All right. Gonna do kind of some stippling down here on the edges to make them look a little rougher. And I want to bring out, remember, underneath that, the stud. These studs are less punched in and more on top of the surface, so you may have to be a little more careful in picking out that area underneath to make the stud look like it's coming out of the leather. If you ever get puddles and you can't draw a fine line, it's probably too much fluid in your brush. So again, reload and take the paint off of it so that you can do a more precise line. And even then, you may find because of your brush angle, you get a little out of control. No big deal. Grab your shadow color and kind of, we've got some stippling here, so we can stipple right over that. So that leather's coming up all very nice now. I haven't done the little scales here. With little scales or ring mail, scale mail like this, in this case I'm just doing little rings of leather because I figure she's all in leather. She wouldn't be in real scale if she was a rogue, so she does leather. Maybe she likes the scales because it reminds her of dinner, because fish. So I'm just going to hit the lowest part of each of these little scales to bring out the edges, because that's where the light would catch. Yeah, I never do dry brushing, Hugh. I'm not a dry brusher. I don't like the lack of control. I very much love stippling, though, because it does give me a lot of control, so I can keep everything tight. Dry brushing was actually the technique I learned last. And I knew how to do smooth highlights before I learned how to dry brush. And I'll use dry brushing on big terrain pieces and stuff like that where I want some rough texture, like buildings and roofs and things like that. Most of my little guys, though, I don't want a lot of rough texture, so... There we are, getting those little scales to come out. Hey, Francis, 13. It's a sub +1 anniversary. Yeah, after reading the D&D Catfolk race description, tabaxi description, I can see why people really like them. It's a fun concept for a race. And I'm just going to put an extra shadow in, kind of right next to this dagger, because there would be a shadow, and to separate the dagger out nicely from the scales. Alrighty, not too bad there. Alright, I think we got a pretty good look on the leather on the front of the kitty this time. Pretty happy with it. She's getting really close to done. Really, really close. We need to do her gold on her swords and on the dagger here. I need to come back and do these rivets, highlight all the little studs and stuff, which won't take too long. I could actually do it. Yeah, I probably could do it now. Let's see here. Huh. There's a kitty outside. That's a bummer in that cold. I hope the kitty has a very thick coat. But it's hard for them to find food in this, I bet, too. Alright, so little tiny pinpoints of white to bring out these little rivets. On the upper side of the rivet, wherever the light is coming from. Just using pure white. You should always have pure white or very, very close to it as your highest highlight on NMM. Made a little bit of a blurf there. Got a bit too big. Let's see if I can scrub it off. Usually with thin paint, it's really easy to put some water on it and scrub off your errant highlight and reapply. Thank you, Miller. This is sculpted by Julie Guthrie. She is Shadoweyes Catfolk Rogue, and she's part of the Bones Black Reaper line. And Julie's here in the chat, actually. The sculptor is here in the chat under the moniker of Green Users. That's Bob and Julie. The sculpting duo that does a lot of awesome stuff for Reaper. Julie has done a lot of Catfolk for Reaper. I think a whole bunch more of them are coming out in Bones 5. Yeah, I'll wrap it up soon, guys. I just wanted to get some of these rivets highlighted since they're so small and so quick. because I already base coated them with the cloudy gray. There we go. Now she's looking kick butt. Grr. Grr. So now we just need the gold. Like for the front of her. I just need to do a little bit more. I need to hit the leather on the back. Tighten up the back. Probably need to finish the swords because we started blocking them in, but I didn't really smooth stuff out a lot. I didn't do my extra highlights back here. But yeah, and then we just got to decide if we're going to take the armor up a little bit. So really, she's very close to done, and Rock Troll's pretty much done. So we're putting a wrap on several of our figures. We're going to have to dig out some new ones. Yeah, put food out for the kitties later today. Makes sense. For the poor outdoor animals who are suffering through this also. But yeah, so all right. Well, let's start looking for a raid. John or Justin or whoever is handling the ship on this one. Oh, cool, Miller. Oh, my brush decided to go kapooey there. Reform, yay. Yeah, 28mm. We have a lot of cool figures. Do we have it? Yeah, there we go. We are rating Rush for Hire, guys. I don't know, Pendrake. I've got a bunch. I just ordered some too. But maybe we'll go and do the genie for our replacement for Rock Troll, and then I haven't picked a replacement for this one yet. Alrighty. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. This has been Reaper Pro Tips with me, Anne, and we covered a lot of leather on the Tabaxi today, and also we covered how to paint those great eyeballs. So I hope you all had a great time, and we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Living Statue Day, all right? So have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.